Welcome to Playback with another episode of History. Today we're talking about a meeting where a handful of men carved up an entire continent like it was a birthday cake. This is the unbelievable story of the Gentleman's Agreement, a series of decisions made in a room in Europe that drew the map of Africa we still see today, and in doing so, changed the fate of millions of people forever.
To really get this, I want you to start with a little thought experiment. Imagine 14 men break into your home. But here's the thing. They don't threaten you. Instead, they just sit down at your dining room table, pull out a map of your house, and start signing a contract. A legally binding contract, dividing it all up. Who gets the living room, who gets the kitchen, who gets your bedroom. They're literally deciding who owns your stuff, right in front of you.
Sounds like a bizarre movie plot, right? Well, this wasn't fiction. This was the reality for an entire continent. This was the Berlin Conference of 1884. It's the moment Europe put a formal, legalistic stamp on the infamous Scramble for Africa and turned what was basically a continental robbery into a so-called gentleman's agreement.
So to understand this crime, you got to understand the motive. And for that, we need to rewind to the late 19th century. Europe's Industrial Revolution was a hungry beast. For decades, the big powers had just nibbled at the edges of Africa with coastal trading posts. But now, they were pushing inland, desperate for more. By the early 1880s, things were getting tense. Britain, France, Portugal, they were all starting to bump into each other, and it really looked like a massive European war over Africa was about to kick off.
So what did they want so badly? Well, think about it. Their factories needed rubber for tires, palm oil to keep all that new machinery running smoothly, copper for all the new electrical wires. The list goes on. But it wasn't just a smash and grab for resources. Africa was also seen as this huge untapped market where they could sell all the stuff their factories were pumping out. It was a perfect and perfectly predatory economic cycle.
And this is where the German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, steps onto the stage. Now, Bismarck wasn't a huge fan of colonies himself. What he really, truly hated was the idea of Britain and France going to war right on his doorstep. That would destabilize everything. So his solution was incredibly cynical. He basically said, look, if you're all going to rob this place, can we at least do it in an orderly way? So he called a conference in Berlin to create a set of rules for the theft.
Which brings us to the room itself, November 15th, 1884. Let's take a look at who got an invitation to this party, and, maybe even more telling, who was left standing outside.
Now check out this guest list. The contrast is just staggering. On one side, you've got all the heavy hitters of the day, Great Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, plus 10 other nations, including the US. And on the other side, nothing. A complete vacuum. Not a single African leader was invited. The Sultan of Zanzibar, the King of the Asante, the Emperor of Ethiopia, the people whose land was being discussed had absolutely no say in the matter.
And sitting there among all these gentlemen was maybe the shrewdest con artist of the whole century, King Leopold II of Belgium. And here's the kicker. He wasn't even technically there for Belgium. Nope, he was there representing his own private front organization, a supposed charity called the International African Association. And boy, did Leopold know how to sell it. He spun this incredible tale for the other leaders. He said his only mission in the Congo was a noble one, to bring civilization, to end the local slave trade, and to work for the moral and material regeneration of the people. It was a beautiful, inspiring, humanitarian lie.
And you know what? They bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. The conference officially recognized his claim and gifted him, a single man, his own personal kingdom. The Congo Free State, a territory 76 times the size of his actual country, Belgium. Just hand it over.
The final agreement, the General Act, even had a clause, Article 6, that said all the powers would watch over the preservation of the native tribes. Of course, we now know that in Leopold's Congo, that promise was the prelude to one of the worst atrocities in human history. But beyond the Congo, the conference created a key legal weapon that would accelerate everything.
It all came down to this one concept, buried in Article 35, the principle of effective occupation. See, before Berlin, a country could just, plant a flag on a coast and kind of claim everything inland. This new rule completely changed the game.
So what did effective occupation mean in the real world? Well, it created a simple playbook. Step 1, plant your flag. Step 2, set up some kind of administration, like a fort or a government office. And step 3, the most important one, have troops on the ground to enforce your control. You couldn't just call dibs anymore. You had to actually possess it.
And here is the great
tragic irony. This rule was probably intended to prevent fights by making things more orderly, but it did the exact opposite. It lit a fire under every single European power. It turned the scramble for Africa from just a phrase into a frantic, literal, military race against time. If you didn't get your soldiers into that river valley right now, you could be sure your rival would. This mad dash to prove effective occupation led to explorers rushing inland with stacks of treaties, tricking local chiefs into signing away everything for a few trinkets. But that race leads us to the most visible, and maybe the most destructive, legacy of the entire conference.
Just look at a modern map of Africa, and you'll see them everywhere, the straight lines. Nature doesn't work in straight lines. Rivers bend, mountains curve. People have followed traditional routes for centuries. Only a colonizer with a ruler and a pencil, thousands of miles away, draws dead straight lines based on nothing but latitude and longitude.
The human cost of this geometry was just devastating. The diplomats in Berlin didn't care about ancient kingdoms or ethnic groups. They just sliced right through them. The Somali people suddenly split across lands claimed by 5 different European powers. The Bakongo Kingdom cut into 3 pieces, ruled by the French, Belgians, and Portuguese. And at the same time, groups that have been rivals for centuries were suddenly shoved together inside these new, artificial boxes called Nigeria or Sudan.
This wasn't just sloppy map-making. It was like planting 1,000 time bombs across the continent. So many of the civil wars, ethnic conflicts, and political problems that we've seen in the 20th and 21st centuries can trace their roots right back to these arbitrary lines drawn in Berlin.
And let's be absolutely clear about something. That map might have been drawn with a pen in a comfortable office in Berlin, but it was enforced inch by bloody inch with the brand new Maxim machine gun against decades of fierce African resistance. When you really think about it, the Berlin Conference is a chilling lesson in how evil can be bureaucratized. This wasn't a crime committed by some shadowy monster. This was planned, debated, and justified with international law by educated, well-dressed politicians in suits.
Which leaves us with a question that still haunts us today. How is it possible that a line drawn with a ruler on a map way back in 1884 can still define the geography of conflict, of poverty, and of identity in our modern world? We'd genuinely love to know what you think about that in the comments below.
Because in the end, what happened in that room in Berlin was so much more than just dividing up territory. They didn't just steal land or resources or labor. They stole the entire future trajectory of a continent. Thanks for joining us on Playback. If you believe, like we do, that understanding the past is absolutely crucial to understanding our present, make sure you subscribe. We're decoding history, one explainer at a time. See you in the next one.